I'm not getting $1 more than I would have if this deal did not happen.
So here's the thing that just went down. The UFC locked in what might be the most massive media rights deal we've ever witnessed in combat sports history. This thing is enormous. We're looking at a 7-year contract that's worth an incredible $7.7 billion. But what makes this deal absolutely mind-blowing is how it flips everything upside down. This revolutionary agreement with Paramount basically destroys the old pay-per-view system completely. Yeah, that's right. Every single one of their fight nights is shifting exclusively to streaming under one simple monthly subscription. Obviously, fans across the globe went completely wild when they heard this news. And honestly, can you blame them for going crazy? Over in the corporate offices, executives were celebrating like they just won the lottery. Dana White himself stepped up to the microphone and boldly announced that this represents the dawn of an incredible new chapter for mixed martial arts. But then something happened that changed everything instantly. The entire fantasy crumbled right before our eyes. Justin Gaethje, famously called the Highlight, stepped in front of those cameras during the UFC 304 media day. This guy is a genuine legend who holds the record for earning the most fight night bonuses in the entire history of the organization. What came out of his mouth next? Just 6 simple words, ripped away the curtain and exposed everything. He looked straight into those cameras and said, "I'm not getting $1 more." Now here's why that statement hit like a freight train. Right before this moment, Daniel Cormier, someone the entire MMA community respects and trusts, had confidently announced to everyone listening that fighters were already experiencing increased compensation and better benefits because of this massive Paramount partnership. The story that UFC leadership and Dana White were spinning painted a completely different picture than reality. Dana had even suggested that performance bonuses, those special payments fighters get for putting on incredible shows, were going to see significant increases. Everything seemed perfect on the surface. The narrative they were selling was that this would benefit absolutely everyone. Every fighter would see bigger paychecks. Every athlete would be taken care of better. But then Justin Gaethje, the Highlight himself, the exact fighter who was headlining the very first show of this supposed golden era, stepped forward and completely destroyed that carefully crafted story. His raw honesty cut through all the corporate spin and showed us exactly how the UFC's massive $7.7 billion windfall actually reveals the harsh truth about what fighters really earn in this sport. Let's break down exactly what this game-changing deal actually looks like. Mark your calendars for Saturday, January 24th, 2026. That's when UFC 324 goes down at the iconic T-Mobile Arena right in the heart of Las Vegas. This isn't just another fight card. This represents the very first numbered event happening under the UFC's incredible new 7-year, $7.7 billion broadcasting partnership with Paramount. And listen, for everyone who loves watching fights, this is genuinely fantastic news, a complete game changer. Think about what fans were dealing with under that old ESPN setup. If you were someone who never missed a UFC event, you were dropping a massive $79.99 for every single pay-per-view show, and that was on top of whatever you were already paying monthly for your subscription. Do the math on that, and you'd find yourself spending well over $1,200 every year just to keep up with your favorite fighters. But now, with this brand new Paramount system, all those individual pay-per-view charges disappear completely. Instead, you can access every UFC event for just $7.99 per month if you don't mind ads, or $12.99 monthly for the ad-free experience. So absolutely, from a fan perspective, this represents a massive victory for making the sport more accessible and affordable for everyone. However, when we look at what this means for the UFC and TKO Group holdings, the parent company, the financial numbers become absolutely staggering. That previous ESPN contract was bringing in around $500 million annually for the organization. This new Paramount agreement completely doubles that figure to an absolutely mind-boggling $1.1 billion every single year. Stop and think about that for just a moment. We're talking about an additional $550 million flowing directly into UFC coffers annually. And here's what makes this even more incredible. Since most of their production expenses stay relatively the same, that extra $500 million basically becomes almost pure profit for the company. The only costs that really change are what they decide to pay the fighters, which, as we're about to discover, remains completely at the UFC's discretion. Let's go back to Wednesday, January 22nd, 2026. UFC 334 Media Day is in full swing. Justin Gaethje sits in front of a packed room of reporters and cameras. They're to promote his highly anticipated interim lightweight title battle against the explosive Paddy Pimblett. Gaethje, as everyone knows, earned his nickname the Highlight for very good reasons. He possesses one of the most remarkable and fan-friendly records you'll find anywhere in the UFC. Across his 14 UFC appearances, here's something that'll blow your mind. He's claimed an incredible 14 post-fight bonuses. That means every single time he walks into that cage, he puts on such an amazing show that he walks away with an extra $50,000. One reporter, probably curious about all that bonus money, asked him what he'd done with those earnings over the years. But instead of sharing stories about wise investments or charitable giving, Gaethje dropped a reality bomb that nobody saw coming. He spoke with completely unfiltered honesty, saying, "Man, to have 14 bonuses and not have it equal up to $1 million, that's just not right." He continued, "It should be way more than that. I should have had chances to do better things with my money, but I don't, and I haven't." When you actually crunch those numbers, the math becomes absolutely brutal and hard to believe. Gaethje earned 13 of those bonuses at $50,000 each, bringing his total to $650,000. Then at the legendary UFC 300, in what many people immediately called one of the greatest and most violent battles in UFC history against Max Holloway, he received a special $300,000 fight of the night bonus. Add all that together and his grand total comes to $950,000. That's still $50,000 short of hitting $1 million, despite earning a bonus in literally every single UFC fight of his career. And just for some context about that UFC 300 war with Holloway, it ended with Max landing a knockout punch that left Gaethje completely unconscious with exactly 1 second left in the 5th round. Think about what that means. Gaethje absorbed life-altering, career-shortening punishment for 24 minutes and 59 seconds. His reward for that sacrifice was $950,000 total across his entire UFC career. Then Gaethje shifted gears and addressed the new Paramount deal directly. This is where everything gets really revealing. I hear Daniel Cormier saying everybody is going to get paid more on this card. Gaethje said, clearly showing his frustration, "I'm not getting $1 more than I would have if this deal never happened." This statement, coming from someone headlining the very first event of this so-called new era, completely contradicted everything UFC executives had been proudly telling the world. It makes us wonder about something crucial. If the main event star, the guy kicking off a $7.7 billion era, isn't seeing even a single penny increase, then who exactly is benefiting? To really understand why Gaethje's words carry so much weight, you need to know how the UFC actually pays its fighters. Court documents that came out during the famous Lay vs. Zuffa antitrust case revealed something shocking. UFC fighters typically receive only 16 to 18% of total revenue. Now let's see how that compares to every other major professional sports league in the world, and you'll witness just how massive this gap really is. NBA players, thanks to strong union representation and collective bargaining agreements, take home 50% of league revenue. NFL athletes receive 48%. NHL players also get 50%. Even the WNBA, which is still a developing league, guarantees its players 50% of revenue. The UFC's 16 to 18% doesn't just fall short of these standards, it's a completely different universe. This enormous disparity exists for one fundamental reason that can't be ignored. UFC fighters don't have a union. They have zero collective bargaining power whatsoever. They're labeled as independent contractors, which strips them of basic benefits like healthcare coverage or retirement plans. In 2023, the UFC by itself generated an enormous $1.3 billion in revenue. During the first half of 2025, that number jumped to an incredible $775 million, showing just how explosively the company continues to grow financially. Yet despite these truly massive and constantly increasing numbers, the fighters who actually create this revenue remain stuck with that same pathetic 16 to 18% split. When Dana White gets directly confronted about increasing fighter compensation, his response during that famous GQ interview was brutally straightforward and dismissive. He stated without hesitation, "It's never gonna happen while I'm here." White continued by asserting, "Believe me, these guys get paid what they're supposed to get paid. They eat what they kill." He even challenged anyone who disagreed, telling them to go start their own MMA promotion if they had problems with how the UFC handles pay. But this challenge completely ignores one undeniable fact. The UFC controls roughly 90% of the entire MMA industry's revenue and top-level talent. Creating a legitimate competing organization isn't just challenging, it's virtually impossible when one company maintains such a stranglehold on the market. This deeply entrenched compensation system creates absolutely brutal financial situations for the majority of fighters. Here's what we're looking at. New UFC fighters might earn gross pay between $10,000 and $20,000 per fight. More established athletes, the ones you recognize from television, might bring in around $50,000, but remember, those are gross numbers before any expenses get subtracted, and those expenses are absolutely crushing. A single training camp can easily cost anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. Coaches take their cut, usually 10 to 20%. Managers grab another 10 to 20%. Then taxes come calling, taking a massive 35 to 40%. On top of all that, annual medical bills, often for injuries suffered while fighting, can range from $10,000 to $30,000. Let me give you some real examples that really drive this point home. Former UFC fighter Miles Jury once netted only $500 profit from a $20,000 fight purse after covering all his expenses. Imagine that, fighting for $20,000, risking everything, and walking away with $500. Even more shocking, Charles Johnson, a UFC flyweight, actually went into debt in early 2025 despite earning a knockout bonus. His manager had to loan him money to take care of his family, particularly urgent since his wife was about to have a baby. Johnson scored a huge knockout, earned $50,000 in bonus money, and still ended up with a negative bank balance. This is the terrifying reality of UFC compensation for most athletes. The UFC has been fighting multiple antitrust lawsuits recently. The Lee vs. Zuffa case, for example, claimed anti-competitive practices that deliberately kept fighter pay artificially low from 2010 to 2017. In September 2024, the UFC finally settled for a significant $335 million payout. Payments started in September 2025, going out to over 1,100 fighters. Legendary Anderson Silva received the largest individual payment at $10.3 million, while the typical fighter got around $200,000. Now, while this settlement definitely acknowledged that something was seriously wrong with UFC pay practices, it's important to understand that it hasn't actually changed their fundamental business approach. Justin Gaethje, the fighter we're focusing on here, isn't just some complainer whining about money. He represents exactly the type of athlete the UFC claims to reward most. He fights with an exciting, all-action style that puts entertainment ahead of personal safety. He takes huge, often dangerous risks. He absorbs terrible, debilitating damage. His battle against Max Holloway at UFC 300, as we discussed, was instantly recognized as one of the all-time greatest fights because of its pure violence and excitement. Gaethje has openly admitted that his fighting approach directly determines what he gets paid. He explained, "This is my job, I do this for the money." Then he added with striking clarity, "If I was to take a heavy wrestling approach, they would never be paying me what they're paying me now." This statement perfectly reveals the UFC's completely backward incentive system. Fight safely, protect your long-term health, and you'll earn less money. Fight recklessly, absorb brain trauma, entertain the crowd, and maybe you'll make enough to support your family. And let's examine how arbitrary these bonuses really are. At UFC 300, Dana White personally gave Gaethje a $300,000 bonus after that incredible Holloway fight. But here's the behind-the-scenes story. Gaethje's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, had argued that Gaethje deserved a full $500,000. According to inside reports, Abdelaziz literally grabbed a bag full of cash from UFC executive Hunter Campbell during negotiations, forcing the UFC to chase him around for 10 days before they finally agreed on $300,000. This story perfectly demonstrates two important things. First, the completely random nature of UFC bonuses, which seem to be decided on a whim, and second, the complete lack of power that fighters have in these situations. The core problem remains that the UFC operates without any fighter representation. Back in 2016, the Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association attempted to get started, but it never gained any real momentum. The brutal truth is that up-and-coming fighters simply couldn't risk challenging such a powerful organization. The immediate threat of being released from the UFC roster and losing their entire income was too frightening for most. The UFC's virtual monopoly creates this terrible intimidation factor. Speak up about pay and you might get cut. Try to organize and you might never compete in the top promotion again. Dana White has been crystal clear about his complete opposition to any union formation. "It's never gonna happen while I'm here." White stated emphatically, "As long as Dana White runs the UFC, it appears fighters will remain without union representation. They will not collectively negotiate. They will not secure the same basic revenue percentage that athletes in every other major professional sport take for granted." The difference between executive wealth and fighter compensation makes this whole situation impossibly stark. Dana White's estimated net worth exceeds $500 million. He owns multiple luxury homes. He travels the world in private aircraft. Meanwhile, just to hammer this point home again, Charles Johnson's bank account went negative despite earning a knockout bonus. He had to borrow money from his manager just to support his family while his hiss was about to give birth. Ariel Helwani, a well-known MMA journalist, broke this shocking story in early 2025, posting on social media, "Charles Johnson's bank account went into the red this week. His manager lent him some money. Johnson has a baby arriving any day now. Got this big KO, got a bonus too." This post obviously sparked massive outrage throughout the combat sports world. How people demanded to know, could a UFC fighter who just earned a knockout bonus in a multi-billion-dollar company possibly end up with a negative bank balance? The answer, devastatingly simple, comes down to that broken pay structure we keep discussing. After paying coaches' fees, managers' percentages, crushing training camp costs, taxes that consume huge chunks, ongoing medical bills, and travel expenses, fighters net far less than their seemingly impressive gross pay might suggest. Look at other examples. Demetrius Johnson, widely considered one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters ever, actually worked construction during his early UFC days. He fought for the bantamweight title in 2011 for only $14,000 to show and $14,000 to win. Felicia Herrig, another veteran fighter, said something heartbreaking in court documents. "Fighting for the UFC was the achievement of what I thought was my dream. But the reality is, after a lengthy career, I left with a worn-down body, severe depression, and nothing to show for my years competing at the highest level of the sport." Justin Gaethje, by comparison, has been fortunate. He's earned substantial money. He's made smart property investments. But even he recognizes that the entire system is fundamentally flawed. Even he believes that 14 bonuses in 14 fights should definitely add up to more than $950,000. Even he, the face of this new era, admits that the largest media rights deal in combat sports history hasn't added a single extra dollar to his paycheck. The UFC 34 press conference was supposed to be pure celebration. It was designed to announce the first event of a new golden age, supported by a historic $7.7 billion agreement and promising better access for fans worldwide. Instead, Justin Gaethje's painfully honest remarks threw a massive shadow over the entire event. They exposed the basic, deeply rooted injustice of the UFC's compensation system. They showed that executive promises about improved fighter pay were either incredibly premature or completely misleading. Dana White has stated clearly that increasing fighter pay to 50% of revenue will absolutely never happen. While he remains in control, he often points to boxing, a sport he claims was ruined by giving fighters too much money. But here's the key difference. The UFC isn't at risk of being destroyed by money. Actually, the complete opposite is true. The UFC is thriving financially beyond anyone's wildest dreams. TKO Group Holdings is currently worth over $20 billion. The company just locked up a $7.7 billion media deal, and its revenue grows dramatically every year. The only people not thriving, not receiving their fair share of this incredible success, are the fighters who make everything possible. The athletes who risk their bodies and brains every time they enter that octagon. For any real change to actually occur, fighters would need to do something that seems impossible. They would need to organize. They would need to form a union, despite the UFC's fierce, well-documented resistance. They would need to collectively demand their worth, despite the terrifying possibility of retaliation and being blacklisted. The Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association tried and failed back in 2016. Maybe Justin Gaethje's brave statements at UFC 324 Media Day will restart that crucial conversation. Or maybe, tragically, nothing will actually change. Maybe the UFC will keep generating billions and billions while paying its brave fighters less than 20%. Maybe executives will continue building even greater wealth, living in complete luxury, while the athletes who are the heart and soul of the sport continue struggling just to pay basic bills between fights. This Saturday night, Justin Gaethje enters the Octagon at UFC 304. He'll battle Paddy Pimblett for an interim lightweight title. He will absolutely deliver another spectacular, thrilling performance because that's simply what the highlight always does. He'll risk permanent brain damage and life-altering injuries because that's exactly what the current UFC system rewards. And when everything is finished, whether he wins or loses, he will earn the exact same amount he would have received if this massive $7.7 billion Paramount deal had never existed. Not $1 more. That is the harsh, unvarnished truth about fighter compensation in the UFC. That's what a $7.7 billion media rights deal actually means for the dedicated, courageous athletes who make it all happen. Absolutely nothing additional. And as Dana White has made perfectly clear, it's a situation that as long as he's running things will never change.